Good day. Welcome to the Cory Morgan Show, Second Take. This is a special we'll be running every Friday for the next few months, just to make sure there's so much going on. We got an election going on, of course, and that's where most of the focus is going to be in covering this show and just kind of wrapping up your week on what's happened week by week. Next Friday, this won't be recorded anymore. This is recorded, but recently recorded if you're viewing it right now. We're going to be going back to live on Fridays, and I much prefer that. So make sure to tune in on those Fridays, get the comments in, get the discussion going, and it's a more extended show covering a lot more of the issues. So today, in a little bit, I'm going to talk to our own BC Bureau Chief, Jarryd, and he's going to speak on, the BC perspective in this federal election, where the issue is going to be there. There's a lot of swing seats in BC. It's an important province in these things when they get competitive. Then a couple of guests are going to come in, Greg Mather and Tessa Partridge Mather. These shouldn't be tough names for me, but I still have issues with them. And they're going to talk about precious metals. I mean, it's important, especially when we get the markets and currency doing what they are these days. They're a good Alberta bunch talking about how you can buy some gold and silver and keep things a little more stable for you. And from the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, Patrice Dutil. Now, I'm probably screwing that up. It's a French name, but he'll get over it. And he wrote a great book on Sir John A. Macdonald recently. Because, again, we're getting this new patriotism. Well, let's start looking at our historical figures then from a proper lens. If you really want to show your love for Canada or not, you should just know. I mean, it's just been bad that we've been demonizing our past country's founders. All right, to kick things off, though, we're going to have Dave Naylor, our news editor, in to just kind of give us an update what's been going on. Not too much breaking in the news these days.
No, all is quiet.
Yeah.
All is quiet. Happy days are here again. We have a new prime minister.
Oh, yes, that's right.
Ding dong, the witch is dead. Goodbye, Justin Trudeau. Mark Carney sworn in earlier this morning in Ottawa. Done deal. Goodbye, Trudeau. You going to miss him?
No. Not even a little bit. Boy, it's funny, and it took a long time. But I kind of built a bit of at least a respect for Chrétien in his term, even though I despised him as an Albertan and he was a Liberal Prime Minister in that time. But as things got worse, particularly when you had Justin Trudeau, I could look back on Chrétien and respect the man at least. I cannot see my view changing on Justin to ever look back on him and say, oh boy, he did this right or wrong. Or
No, I wonder how history is going to look at him. I mean, he's got no legacy, does he?
No, the carbon tax, his own party's chucking to the side. The electric vehicle thing is falling apart. What's he got?
Nice hair, I guess.
Yeah, he's got that.
I'm sure he can go on the speaking circuit. And there'll be some organizations that'll pay him $50,000 to go and...
You're a former prime minister, no matter who you are. You'll get a job somewhere.
And he's a trust fund millionaire, right? I mean, he's been rich since the day he was born.
Oh, he'll still have servants to pour his morning cereal for the Saturday cartoons.
So, but speaking of all the trappings of office, it's not taking Prime Minister Carney long. He's taken the plane out for a spin already. Less than a week in power, and he's taken a jaunt over to London and to Paris. I guess he's got somebody said on Twitter, change his residency plans, from London, where he was the governor of the Bank of England. So it's going to be interesting. And some other great news. We don't have to deal with Gilbo and environment anymore.
Yeah.
So, that cheering you heard yesterday when news leaked out coming from the Alberta legislature, because, let's face it, he's been an arch enemy of Alberta. He's done everything he can to try and ruin the oil and gas industry, being a pain in the ass to Premier Smith, Rebecca Schultz, Brian Jean. They were always very polite about it, but they despised him. Come on.
I mean, it was the eco extreme. There was no reasoning with him. I mean, I'm sure a lot of, Eastern Canadian mining and fishing, I mean, he's gotten his fingers into everything and made industry difficult.
Yeah. And this is a guy who, don't forget, climbed onto the roof of Premier Klein's house, terrifying his poor wife inside, scaled the CN Tower. I mean, he's just a radical Greenpeace activist. And, whichever portfolio he gets next, I'm sure he'll screw that up too.
Well, that's the unfortunate thing. I mean, you're just shuffling things. He's not out, but at least he's out of that particular file for now.
Hopefully he can't do much more damage. Tariff was the other word of the week. Sick of that word. Still sick of it. I was sick of it yesterday. I'm sick of it again. But, Canada started out strong. There was Premier Ford saying we are going to slap 25% electrical tariffs on electricity that we send to the United States. That caused some great angst down in Washington, and President Trump tweeted this is unacceptable, and he would, if it's not canceled immediately, he would launch holy hell upon Ontario, and I think he was something like he will do economic damage that the history books will be talking about in 1,000 years. So Premier Ford folded like a cheap rug, and about an hour later said, okay, yep, no, we're not putting the 25% tariffs on, which drew laughs from Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary in the States, basically mocking him, saying, "Oh, this strong man from Ontario, all it took was a tweet, and he's folding." So tariffs, it's going to go on. New ones coming in April 2nd. So it's sadly we're going to be hearing that word a lot.
Yeah, it's getting tired of it, but it isn't going away. Now we're seeing it spreading. I mean, Trump, he was musing, talking about how he loves tariffs. He loves tariffs. Obviously, he hates economics. Okay, fair enough. But he's going after, French wines now? And champagne.
200%. Can you imagine that? What that's going to do to a cost? A cost of a bottle of French wine? It's going to be crazy.
Well, I mean, it's going to really shore up the American champagne industry, though, right?
I was listening to the list of stuff that Canada's put tariffs on coming into the country, and things that are going to go up. And one of the examples was like a camping trip, sleeping bags up 25%. All this, little axes up 25% to cut your firewood. Golf clubs 25%. So it's the stuff that Canada is tariffing is what you would call, I guess, the nice to haves.
Annoyances.
Yeah, you don't need a new set of golf clubs. I mean, it might help my game, but I could, I don't need one. I don't need a new sleeping bag. But if I was in need of those things, then it would cost me a hell of a lot more money. So,
no getting around it. I mean, a trade war, everybody loses. Yeah. It's just we're paying while there's a dick measuring contest basically between multiple leaders on our wallets.
Yeah, and the good thing is we now have a unelected prime minister to represent us all. Yes. I guess elected by a small member of the small member of the Liberal Party, and him going to Europe is certainly going to push back thoughts of an election too. It's not going to come as quick as we'd hoped or wanted.
No, and that's another painful part of it. I mean, if we're ever going to get resolution, I mean, eventually something happens with this tariff thing and everything else. I mean, some sort of new trade deal must be established, signed off on, negotiated, and stamped. I mean, we know Trump might tear it up any given time. He seems to be prone to that, but that's the intent. But you can't get that until you have a prime minister with a mandate. Like, Carney's just as lame as Justin right now.
Yeah, exactly. So I still think the election is coming soon. But it may not be until late the end of next week, as opposed to today.
All right. Well, we'll be watching and seeing. I know as soon as the writ drops, we'll be letting the world know and getting into campaign coverage mode.
Yeah, pedal to the metal.
All right. Well, thanks, Dave. I'll let you back to your newsroom, and I'll carry on.
You carry on.
Right. Thanks, Dave.
You bet.
So yeah, and as you're, and boy, the readers have been coming in record numbers, which is fantastic. People are paying attention in this election. They're watching the coverage, and lots of them, of course, are subscribers. And that's how we pay our bills, guys. Remember, we're going to be covering an election. We're going to see an election being covered. Most of legacy media relies on subsidies. They are taking dollars from the federal government, which, there's some great reporters out there. There's great columnists out there. There are. But you know what? You tend to dance with the one that brung you. And if you want unvarnished stuff, we are beholden to you because you subscribe. That's how we pay our bills. So check it out, westernstandard.news/subscription. Take one out, $10 a month, especially just test us out for the election period then. I mean, it'll cost $100 for a year, but $10 for a month, and just see how that coverage is, get past that paywall. We've got reporters all across the country, columnists, and of course all these shows are going on. So check it out. Take out a subscription. You'll find it well worth it, just like an old newspaper subscription. It'll help you keep up on those issues, and it helps us just keep getting those reporters out there and working for you. So yes, the election countdown, and that's what we're really going to focus on with this show. So interesting stuff we've been talking about. When's Carney going to call it? Some people thought maybe right away. Some thought longer. We'll see. I kind of almost thought it might happen when after the throne speech is read. Or at least, read it like a campaign thing and then just fall on that at the time. Who knows? But people thinking he's going to go right away now when he's bouncing over to Europe for a couple of days. Obviously, he's not going to call it on Monday or Tuesday because he's going to be over in Europe. But isn't that weird? Like, what on earth? You've just won the leadership of the party. You've just been coronated the prime minister, even though, nobody's really had a chance to vote for you yet. And you leave the country? Aren't there a few things to be done around here? Or even in his own interest? Shouldn't he be getting his cabinet together? Shouldn't he be organizing things? Like, we have to remember, during the election campaign, whenever it happens, the government's still there. Some things are still going to happen. Some things are still going to have to move through. You need a cabinet for that. And he hasn't formally put that together yet. It's a caretaker government. They just respond to things. When the hell is he going to do that? We as weak as that cabinet and caretaker government may be, it's all we got, and it's what we have to have at that point. And now, truth. Let's get on to truth. It always, they talk about the first casualty of war is also the first casualty of election campaigns, and Carney is kicking things off, being no different. So, the big anchor around the Liberals' neck for a long time was the carbon tax. That was Justin Trudeau's legacy policy. That was his big thing. Justin was going to save the world by imposing a carbon tax and, make the temperatures nicer, right? Carbon tax, make weather gooder. So yeah, the interesting thing with Mark Carney, as I said, with the truth. So he's coming out, as I said, the carbon tax is Justin's big policy, his hallmark policy, and now it's being thrown to the roadside. People realize, the Liberals even realize, wow, we are not going to win the election by pushing this consumer carbon tax. But what Carney is saying, he's not getting rid of the consumer carbon tax. Well, he's getting rid of the consumer end of it, where you see it directly. But he's going to dump it on the big polluters. He's going to dump it on the big companies. Well, and he said that the tax won't be passed on to consumers when he does that. Of course it will. And this was the guy who, this is different than Trudeau. Trudeau wasn't the sharpest knife in the drawer. He didn't think on his feet. He had to read lines. Carney knows a degree of economics. And that doesn't mean he's the right economics or not. Keynes was a smart man, but his economics were garbage. Now, Carney, though, saying this, he knows bloody well, of course, the cost of the tax is going to be passed down to consumers. It has to. Do you think the companies, when they suddenly get a tax hike on them, will just keep their products at the same price? No, they'll raise the price, and then the consumers will still pay it. Plus, it won't do a darned thing for the environment. That's the other big lie with the carbon taxes. It's going to save the world. It's going to change the environment. It's going to change the weather. Not. It doesn't change your behavior. You still have to buy the same items. You still have to heat your house. You still have to fill your car up. You still use metals. You still use plastics. There's no getting away from them. I mean, there's good environmentalism. There certainly is. When you want to reduce your usage of some products. Reducing litter, particulate pollution, things being burned without filters. Absolutely. But this carbon tax, garbage. It's enough. BC's had a carbon tax for decades. Has it gotten any cooler there yet? But the bottom line is, though, Carney is already lying. That's what concerns me, right? When he says that it won't be passed on to consumers. If you really are in love with your policy, if you really think that this carbon tax is going to help, well, you should be able to make the case honestly. You should be able to say, yes, Canadians will have to pay, but that's the price you pay to save the world, isn't it? We've got to be the Boy Scouts. We've got to take it on the chin, even if every other country's burning coal and God knows what else out there, because we're going to save the world. That's yeah, I know it's a hard case to make. So I guess I could see why Carney's moving into lying mode, but it seems to be effective. We're looking at the numbers, we're looking at the polls, and there's no getting around it anymore. It's not just a short-term bump going on in the polls right now. Multiple pollsters are showing, and I'm going to break through some of those in a little while, that the Liberals have been gaining, and part of it isn't just the loss of Trudeau, it's getting rid of that carbon tax. So maybe people should be better informed on just what that means if we get rid of it. All right, well, let's move to the west side. I'm going to be covering areas, zones, and parts of the country as this election unfolds. Well, once it's called anyway. So we're going to start over on the west side. We're going to talk to Jarryd Yager, our BC Bureau Chief out there, and just see what's bubbling out in British Columbia as we move towards Election Day. So Let's get him on board and see what's going on. Hey, Jarryd, how's it going?
All right, good. How are you?
Very good. It's just exhausting trying to keep up with things right these days. They're unfolding so much. I mean, we spoke to you the other day on your provincial politics and what's going on there, but federally, British Columbia. I mean, we're all going into a federal election at some point or another. BC is a real interesting, complicated swing province. Maybe kind of break down how BC sits on the federal scene right now.
Okay, so let's take it back to the 2021 election. And in the polls, the Conservatives came in with 33% of the vote, Liberals 27%, and the NDP 29%. And that's a pretty good breakdown of how things usually are in the province. You got the greater Vancouver area and the island, which tends to skew left. And then more inland and then further north tends to skew right. And what we've seen now is, at least the most recent polls are showing the NDP have lost quite a bit of support. They're down to just 19%. The Liberals, again, down to now 30%. And the Conservatives have actually jumped from that 33% all the way up to 43%. And so I reckon in the federal election, we may see a similar shift to the right that we saw last year in the provincial election.
Yeah, and like BC, the lower mainland, I mean, it's predominantly where you're going to see more progressive voters and seats. But at the same time, there's also some very conservative seats in there, or at least the way the votes land and so on. You get to see quite a mixture of seats down there. It's not all uniformly Liberal or uniformly NDP. There's a bit of everything. So, I know Vancouver Island or Salt Spring Island isn't going to go conservative anytime soon, but some of the Vancouver ridings might have a change in colors, I would imagine.
No, for sure. But actually, speaking of Vancouver Island, one of the ridings to watch is North Island Powell River. So the NDP incumbent, she's not running again this time around. And the Conservatives, they have Aaron Gunn, who's familiar to many in conservative circles. Mm-hmm. And so I imagine that because in the provincial election, it went conservative. So it'll be interesting to see whether they follow that trend on the federal level as well.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I mean, Aaron Gunn, I've been on this show before. I've been on his show before, actually, when he had one. He's a very outspoken, classic conservative sort of guy, small c. And so the Conservatives, at least, I mean, it's a matter of the nominations and such, but they didn't take the tact then of trying to, say, put a red Tory in up on the north end of Vancouver Island and try to kind of nudge towards the middle. They put an unapologetic conservative up there, I would imagine, hoping to just, corner that vote and take the seat potentially.
Yeah. And I've had the privilege of covering some of his rallies up there. And yeah, he's got the support of the mayor and quite a few of the community members. There's enthusiasm for change. So
yeah, Northern Vancouver Island, for people unfamiliar with it, I mean, it's much more rural. I mean, there's some larger centers up there kind of, but it's not the same as Victoria where it's a larger city and more established, a large seniors population and such.
Yeah, I don't think we'll ever see the South Island or any of the Gulf Islands turn blue, but up in the north, there's definitely the potential there.
Great. Well, that'll be something to watch. What are the issues, do you think? And again, looking into Vancouver, like I talked a bit about that before. I date myself, but in the 90s, I always thought it was cool because you could have an NDP member right next to a Reform Party member who were very conservative back then, right next to a Liberal member and just everything in between. What issues are driving things in Vancouver, though? What's on the minds out there right now?
So obviously the top two would be the carbon tax and the failed drug policy. And, every time Pierre Poilievre comes to town, those are the two things that he hammers on. And yeah, the BC NDP and Premier David Eby, he has made it clear that as soon as the federal government acts as the requirement that BC has a consumer carbon tax, he will do the same. And so that's probably issue number one. But cleaning up our streets and making sure that those who have substance abuse problems get the help that they need, that's something that across the political spectrum, people here in BC want to see the federal government take more initiative on and actually follow through with their promises.
Yeah, and that's interesting. Like they basically took the bullets out of Poilievre's gun on the carbon tax. It looks like no matter who gets elected, the consumer portion of the carbon tax is going to be taken away. So he's got to pivot a little. It's been very effective for him down there. But the public safety, the fentanyl, the addiction issue, it's bad everywhere, but it's very acute in Vancouver. It always has been. It's one of the things, no matter where you are in the political spectrum, if you're worried for your safety or you're worried about the safety of your loved ones if you have an addicted family member, it doesn't matter what your political stripe is. You want a solution to that. And the Liberals kind of really dropped that ball when they went into and out of the legalization of hard drugs idea. I mean, maybe well-meaning, but it backfired terribly. So I could guess that Poilievre is going to pivot maybe and go a little harder on the law and order and maybe treatment options or things like that for the addiction issue. And, just pointing out the failures of the enablement approach.
I would imagine so, yeah. And again, during the provincial election last fall, I spoke to a lot of first-time Conservative voters who said, we don't necessarily agree with the party on this or this, but when it comes to public safety, we want something new. We want, someone else to come in and say, hey, maybe we can try this.
Yeah, I mean, there's no simple solutions. No province or state or country has managed to solve this issue. I mean, some have done better than others, but it's just not going away. As you said, just trying something new. Look at other models. We know what's not working, so move on to the other things. So getting into interior British Columbia, that's more resource-based, more rural, and it tends to be more solidly conservative. But again, Kelowna, Kamloops, provincially, they have some swing in there. Are they still pretty solidly conservative federally there, though?
I would imagine so, yeah. And you saw in Kelowna, that whole region kind of skewed conservative in the provincial election. So I reckon that'll transfer over to the federal as well.
So a story you just wrote the other day, which was kind of interesting. University of BC's Kelowna campus, they tried to form a conservative club, and they weren't allowed to. What happened there?
So from what I gathered, it was a purely political decision. They mentioned the student union in their post or in their response to the request that it's okay to have political groups, but the values and the ideas that they alleged were put forth by the Conservative Party, especially those that they said targeted Black and LGBTQ students, those were not okay, and therefore you can't have a club that champions those values. They didn't exactly say which policies or ideas they were talking about, just kind of a blank statement.
I don't recall, so what is it? They're going to bring back lynchings or slavery again, or, different water fountains for different people. I mean, it gets tiresome, with that. When we're talking about a mainstream party that really, is as much as half of Canadians may support, and these groups go and accuse them of that kind of garbage. I mean, you can disagree, but it's just getting old.
No, exactly. And it doesn't make any sense because down at the main campus here in Vancouver, UBC, there's a conservative club. So there's a precedent. One already exists. There's no reason why they can't have it at the UBCO campus.
No, I mean, all you do is just don't join. It's an unfortunate thing. Kind of looking at things all around, though. I mean, in past elections, we saw a lot more of it. I think we're not seeing it as much now, though. The whole woke issue, I don't think that's front of mind for a lot of voters. I mean, LGBTQ issues, they're always there, and First Nations settlements and race issues. Of course, the Liberals are going to try a bit. They're going to try and pull up abortion, even though nobody's talking about changing anything with it and all that. But I'm not seeing much appetite from the public either. I mean, they're worried more about their wallets and their safety right now, I think.
No, exactly. And, most of those issues, abortion and stuff like that, they're pretty settled in Canada. And whereas in the States, there's always debate between the two sides that could translate to legislation. But here it's pretty much the way things are. And so, yeah, I mean, with all the threats coming from Trump and elsewhere, and just the damage that's been done domestically over the past few years, yeah, people have other things that they're worried about that impact them more on a day-to-day basis.
Well, I would think, I mean, it's just my view on it, that people might be a little exhausted a bit with the social issues and the woke kind of overplaying their hand. I mean, grew up or, was in my early adulthood through, the big issue was same-sex marriage. And there was a lot of battles. And people seem to forget, too. It's funny, we were watching Chrétien giving a speech and everybody applauding him, but he voted against that every single time as a liberal. But we've moved past it, and it's unthinkable that anybody's going to reverse that. It's, it's fantastic. We've broadened it and let people marry, and great, let's carry on with it. But they keep moving the goalposts down the field, and now we're getting into this bizarre trans stuff and into the, minors and so on, and men competing in women's sports. And I think they finally just kind of pushed it too far in the public. They haven't pushed back, but they've just closed them out.
Mm-hmm. No, for sure. And there's a difference between, advocating for similar rights versus, maybe what you could call special privileges. And I think that's where a lot of people draw the line. But it's a shame that those two have been conflated, because it kind of discredits one when, they're really not the same.
It gets frustrating. I mean, when we see the protests and people shouting trans lives matter, okay, but who's putting them at risk? I mean, what rights are not being conferred upon them? I'm certain that they deal with some prejudice and things, people who are trans individuals, but what legislatively are they missing anymore? It's gets old. All right, well, before I let you go and get back to work, I know you got a lot to cover. What else you got on the burner out there in BC, and what do you see as the issues coming up in the coming days here?
So right now, the big story here in BC is a trio of, now former BC Conservative MLAs are kind of going off, doing their own thing. They're sitting as independents right now, but they're talking about forming a new party. They're known as the True Blue Trio. And they've accused the BC Conservatives of not upholding conservative values, namely free speech, after one MLA was kicked out of the party for things that she said about residential schools. So I'm kind of covering the fallout from that and seeing where that goes.
Well, there's nothing conservatives like more than biting each other's heels when they're in political parties. So hopefully they get some resolution out there and things can come together. I guess when you got a few years to play with before the next provincial election, you can start to rearrange things, but it can also turn destructive. I look forward to your ongoing coverage of it, Jarryd, and I appreciate you checking in with us today.
Yeah, thank you.
Great, thanks. So that is, yes, Jarryd Younger, and as you can see, he's covering all things BC, provincial, federal. Again, he shot some fantastic video. He gets out there in person. Some of the stuff that went viral with those crazed, I didn't even ask so much about it, but that's okay. It seems to be not as big of the news. The Hamas protests, the pro-Hamas protests. And let's call it what it is. It's not pro-Palestine anymore. I think maybe it started that way, but that's, he got those videos of them burning flags and chanting death to Canada, death to Israel. Again, the protests haven't gone away, but the public is tired of them, and it's just a smaller, more exhausting group of anti-Semitic jerks who are tying up the streets and preying on street corners. But I don't think that's going to become much of a federal election issue. So let's go through some of the polls, and I'm going to talk about some of the things. One, I guess, is timing. And people in Canada, when it comes to whether they want an election or what they prefer for timing for an election, it's a tougher question. But you know what? Most of the time, if Canadians are polled, do you want an election right now? Most often they say no. Most common people, non-political weenies like me, don't like elections. They don't enjoy elections. It's something that has to be done, but they don't want to have them any more often than usual. This is a little different, though. This is now we're getting into it's some people who wanted this winter, so right away, let's get on it for March. 14% said yes, let's do it right now. I'm kind of surprised it was even that low, actually. Others saying spring or May, another 33%. Some talking about this summer, June, July, or August, another 10%. So you're looking at 43, close to 60% of people saying, let's get it done with before fall. Let's do it earlier than what the legislated date, which means nothing. It's just legislation, but still the date for this fall. There were 11% who didn't answer. So, okay. So only 31% want to hang on till this fall. As we were talking about, there's been a lot of speculation. Jagmeet Singh would sure like to drag it out. His party support collapsed and he's broke. He would cut a deal with Carney to drag it out if he could, but it doesn't look likely that Carney wants to do that. They're doing all right in the polls. I think they're going to strike while the iron's hot and go for it. All the same, the polls are all over the map and they remain so, but there's a general trend that's consistent. And among multiple pollsters. Now, we got Ecos, which is Frankie Graves. Frankie's crazy. He's putting out stuff that's just absolutely bizarre. So you could take his polls and you could pretty much throw them in the garbage. But other ones, Leger, for example, we bring up there, they've got it going basically saying it's neck and neck, 37% to 37% right now. They are a reputable pollster. Like, there is movement. For whatever reason, Canadians are gravitating back to the Liberals right now. I mean, there's got to be a number of reasons. One of the big ones, of course, was Trudeau. They obviously despised him. He's gone. Now they're more likely to embrace the Liberals again. I find it galling. I hope it's weak. But that's where they're sitting with Leger. And you know, if it was just one outlier, so be it. But let's look at the Leger trend over time. And they've been showing it. We're seeing this same sort of graph from every pollster. They're all showing the same thing. You know, the Liberals are in the toilet. The Liberals are in the toilet. And then they suddenly started spiking with Trudeau's resignation. And there was a bit of a bump down. But now that the leadership's been resolved, bang, they are neck and neck. The Conservatives dropped. The big thing to note, though, is on the bottom of that screen. The NDP has collapsed. They have utterly collapsed. And those votes are going to the Liberals. I mean, the Conservatives are dropping a little, but not as much to warrant where the Liberals went. Jagmeet Singh has destroyed the Liberal Party. And part of it, too, is because Trudeau pulled the Liberals pretty bloody far left. So he's been eating the NDP lunch for quite a while. Also, Jagmeet Singh is weak. He's a terribly weak leader. He was constantly bending over for Trudeau. Every time a policy stance came along, he would bark and yip and go on. Well, will you bring the government down? Well, no. Well, then quit being just shut up, Jagmeet. You're all talk and no action. And it's caught up with them. It's totally caught up with them. The other part, too, is a bit of strategic voting. Left-wing voters, they might prefer the NDP over the Liberals, but they realize their vote won't keep the Conservatives from coming in if they throw it to the NDP. So they're putting it to the Liberals as they see as a lesser evil, which is a gross way to look at it. Down to the bottom, People's Party of Canada, PPC, tiny little line you can see way, way down there. It's not going anywhere. We'll see. We'll see. Because Bernier has been trying to corner things, at least being on the far right, if you want to put it that way. Pro-Trump, focusing on immigration, which is surprising. That issue should be a bigger one in mainstream, actually, and things like that. But it doesn't seem to be grabbing any traction. They're trying to paint the Conservatives as being the same as the Liberals. They're looking pretty similar to it. One of the things Bernier is saying in the trade war, he's saying no counter tariffs. Fair enough. That's a staking some ground that's unique, and there's a financial case to be made for that. It's a fair one to be made. Both the Conservatives and the Liberals support counter tariffs, which is a bad economic policy. So, but is it translating to votes for Bernier's party? Not so far as we can see at all yet. So this election is far from in the bag. Definitely, you can see about the movement too. I mean, the public is sporadic. They're volatile right now. They're prone to quick movement. So that's where a campaign can change things pretty quickly. Nano's polling, I'll pull that one up too, because they've got a similar graph. And you look at the trends over the past few months with them. And again, it's just the same as what you can see with Leger. So, we've got multiple pollsters that see the same trend going on. We have to accept that to a degree, this is what's happening, a crazed spike. For whatever reason, the Conservatives are just not appealing to voters in Canada. We'll see if they can change that over the campaign. Abacus now has been, one of the more conservative-leaning pollsters, I guess. Their results have shown such. So you can see here that this is interesting, actually, with the Canadian plans. They normally have been putting out electoral intention votes, and they've been showing a conservative lead as opposed to the other ones, but it's been narrowing with them as well. It's David Coletto, and they do large rolling polls. They haven't put one out in the last couple of days, but they did put one out with this, which is interesting as well. Now, 62% of Canadians plan to avoid the U.S. for at least the next year amid these political tensions. This is one of the things impacting polls, I think, that people aren't thinking about. There just has been a very frustrated, strong backlash over Trump's assault on Canada in this trade war. And it's an assault. He came out swinging. He's calling us names. He's mocking us with his 51st state stuff, treating us with massive disrespect. People can talk about all sorts of things we should fix in Canada, and that's fine. Canada should increase military funding. I'll talk about that in a moment, sure. But it didn't justify this trade war. And people are very upset with that. People, like myself, part of what I'm bummed about, I love the United States. I love Americans. My mother's American. I spend a lot of time in the USA. We are close allied countries. We're supposed to be friendly. Friends can have little spats, that's fine. But a full force assault, and that's what Trump brought upon things, has really pissed off a lot of people. Or hurt their feelings even, if you want to put it that way. It made it emotional. They're hurt. Like, what are you guys doing? So, no, I'm not going to travel down there is what some people are saying. And they're not buying American goods. And I know that's not going to swing the trade war. I understand that. It only impacts some tourism operators and some people who sell us things. But it shows where Canadians are thinking right now. Now, Poilievre has been viewed as being close, or at least, supportive of Trump. There's never been anything showing him being close or supportive of Trump. Even Trump himself said he doesn't like Poilievre. I don't think Trump much likes anybody except Trump. But that hangover is hitting Poilievre. He is wearing the actions of what's going on south of the border. People are upset, and they feel that Poilievre won't stand up to Trump as strongly as a liberal would. That is definitely impacting the polls. And it's really, really unfortunate. Even though Poilievre's saying in fact, the same things. And that's the bottom. There's part of the problem. You got to distinguish yourself. You're saying the same thing as the liberals. Well, then people say, well, why don't I go with the one I know, right? So just finally, one more on the issues front. There was a question, though, then on armed forces, because people talked about, I just want to highlight issues throughout these shows, too. People have talked about one of the things where Trump has legitimate grievances with Canada. Canada hasn't pulled its weight with defense. Canada has always been able to get away with being lazy because you were next to a military superpower, and there's truth to that. Our NATO obligations, we've never, ever, ever even come close. Even when Trudeau talked about finally we'll expand the spending a bit on military, he's talking like an 8-year timeline to try and reach 2% of our GDP. It's ridiculous. Well, over 51% of people feel that they should increase military spending. This is different. People didn't traditionally think that way. 29% say at least maintain it. So we're talking 80% of Canadians want the same military or more. This is an area that I don't think there's any single thing, whether it's the border or dairy tariffs or anything else, that's going to get Trump off our case. Nobody knows exactly what he wants. But these are things that he has a valid point about. So maybe we can see some campaigning on that. I mean, they talk about it. They've talked about Arctic defense and expansions, but let's see the dollar number. The government's never afraid of spending money. So how is it so hard to commit to bringing ourselves up to 2% of our GDP on military? Why is that got to have to take 7 or 8 years? And if you're looking for popularity, only 7 people want a cut in military spending, and 13% of people, again, refuse to answer, so they weren't sure. That's a good, solid area to go to within things. And I don't typically celebrate campaigning on increasing spending on much of anything. But, these are one of the areas that perhaps the Conservatives could distinguish themselves a little better, giving themselves a plan, endearing themselves to voters, and hopefully shielding us a little more from the damage from this trade war that's hitting on a political level and an economic one. As Dave was saying, even things like golf clubs and such are going up. They're little annoyances for some people, but they add up. And these are major issues for companies and such. Okay, I'm going to move on to my next set of guests. They're here in person, and they're from New World Precious Metals, because it's timely to talk to them right now, because we have such a volatile economy. Markets are going into the sewer. Your savings are getting smaller. What can you do about it? These guys are local, and they got some options to offer us. Okay, so we've got Greg and Tessa from New World Precious Metals here in studio. Thanks for coming in to join me today, guys.
Thanks for having us, Cory.
So as I mentioned just before you guys came in, I mean, it's more acute than ever. When we got these volatile markets, people are worried about their savings. I mean, the currencies are going up and down. The value of investments right now on a lot of things is certainly plummeted. I guess what you guys offer, is a hedge against that instability. Precious metals in particular. So, I mean, explain kind of why have they held their value versus other commodities?
Yeah, well, gold and silver throughout time has maintained or exceeded the rate of inflation, and that's been its main role, and that's why central banks and countries are currently stockpiling, buying records amounts of it, because it is exactly what you said. It's a hedge against devaluating currencies, and so all the main currencies are devaluating because of money printing and because of debt, and therefore gold and silver have been going up in record ROI. So, 30% last year in gold and silver, and this year we're on pace for double that while the stock market's flat and going down and it's overvalued. So, yes, it's a hedge, and we believe all portfolios should have a portion of gold and silver in it because of that reason.
Yeah. So for an individual, if you've already got your investments tied up in conventional investments, why should you consider that? I mean, part of it is, I guess, that it holds, but
Well, there's two things that people can do if they're interested in moving a portion of their assets into precious metals. If they're in a registered account, they can transfer or roll over a portion of their registered account with us or through our partner and have physical gold and silver inside their registered account. Or many people are having, GICs come up, et cetera, and they can take some money out of that and into our international account. Want to talk about that one, or?
Yeah, and so offering these platforms, one of them being an international account in the Cayman Islands, which holds its physical metal in IDS Mississauga or Brinks Calgary. We just offer the best platforms out there. A lot of people think of gold and silver as taking bars and coins home and hiding them, but there are ways of doing it. But to answer your question directly, is gold and silver have outperformed the stock markets in savings and averaged 9% a year, for example, for the last 25 years. But banks and bank advisors don't tell you about it because you're literally taking money out of their system and into your own system that has no counterparty risk because it's not leveraged out. And it actually belongs to you. You have options borrowing against it, and it's actually less risky. There's more options and less what ifs in doing some of these new platforms, not just taking it home and hiding it.
Yeah, and you're buying an actual physical commodity. I mean, that's the point of this, right? I mean, fiat currencies, the government of Canada, we've seen many national examples. If they overprint the resources like anything else, the value of it diminishes. There's no giant store of gold. I mean, there's mines going on, but there's nothing that's going to come and flood that market and knock the value of gold down anytime soon, I imagine. Mm-hmm. So with that and it being able then to transfer, that's, I guess, where people get a little worried too, though. They want to move their funds, but you guys can facilitate that, help them so they can get things out of their GIC or RSP without a penalty or getting themselves in trouble, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. So it's apples to apples. It stays in the registered basket and moves to a new account that you can purchase the physical gold and silver in. So there's no tax implication to that. And for those that have the ability or the liquidity to invest in the international account side, there's no management fees, sign up fees. It's a very simple, easy process and security of Cayman Islands jurisdiction. The metal is physical, held in Canada. So it's a really, like Greg said, you can borrow off it. So I've corporate accounts actually. So it's not only individuals, but actually people that have treasuries with their corporations can hold physical gold and silver. It's just a really great way to have checks and balances against a lot of this volatility going on.
Yeah, well, I mean, the commodity is the commodity and it doesn't change too. I mean, for the issue you get, and there's good and there's bad investment advisors. I mean, that's just life. There always will be. But with mutual funds, things like that, certain banks or individuals might have an interest to push you towards this particular group or this particular bunch because they're getting a commission, not necessarily they're getting you a better return on your investment. I mean, it doesn't make a difference as far as you guys, because it is the value of gold is going to do what it's going to do and silver. So, I mean, it gives you more of a common interest with the investor then.
Yeah. Well, your audience can definitely appreciate that gold and silver is a think for yourself investment where banks, and I'm not saying that we don't need banks, but at the end of the day, as most advisors are given a low, medium, or high risk basket of investments to offer their clients, and they may even be diversified, but it is within their system. So it's not diversified at all if it remains in the equity markets. And gold and silver is truly diversifying one's investment outside of the system.
Yeah, so you said you could borrow against that asset, which is good. It makes people comfortable as well, because you don't want to lock things away. And you guys provide the ability to trade, buy, sell. But how flexible is it for that? I mean, are people really locked in? Will you be penalized if you change or move your portfolio much, or?
No, not at all. It's a physical asset that's highly liquid. So it's traded in all world markets. It's traded on, we say, a phone call. Obviously, lots of communication happens via email and other ways these days, but it's instantly liquid. And we can have money wired out to an account in your legal name within 3 to 5 business days. So if you think of something like property, land, these are physical assets that people feel secure in. But it takes a very long time to go through the sales process, to have your funds released. This is a way to have a physical asset that's very liquid. As far as borrowing against it, in my education around gold and silver, which started around 15 years ago, I began to learn how some of the most powerful families in the world, they have the autonomy they do because they own vast amounts of their own gold. So they don't have to kowtow to other organizations, governments, or jurisdictions for freedom to use their funds. They borrow off their gold holdings. And so that's exactly what we offer for the everyday person, starting at like $5,000. So.
And I was going to get to that. This isn't just something for people if they've got a giant portfolio or, $1 million set aside for retirement or something like that. You can get into this for a modest investment to start rolling, right?
Yeah. Well, our whole business model about 10 years ago was a preferred investment. Specifically the one that's international in the Cayman Islands, it is a preferred investment for $500,000 and $1 million plus people. And we thought this is for everybody and everybody can do it. So yeah, we start at $5,000, but whether it's $5,000 or $100,000 or $1 million, we treat everybody the exact same. It's the same platform. And like Tessa said, you have a $100,000 account, you automatically have an $80,000 line of credit. There's no extra paperwork. It's because the metal's there and it exists. And so we can do that. And if it's $1 million, you have an $800,000 line of credit. And if it's a $10,000 account, you have an $8,000 line of credit. So you can borrow money against it while you let the account keep appreciating.
Yeah, well, that liquid collateral is important. I mean, you might have a car collection that you borrow against it, but no lender is eager. They're going to give you 40% or something because they don't want to deal with trying to sell a bunch of cars. If you default with gold or silver, they know they can just do that. The other thing that's very important, of course, is trust. I mean, there's a million people telling you to trust your money with us or else with things. You guys are local, and that's, so you can pick up a phone and actually talk to a person versus a call center somewhere in an unknown locale.
Absolutely. We actually pride ourselves on service. We have, highly educated brokers assigned to the clients, relationships that are developed. So far we've had zero bad feedback, knock on wood, outstanding reviews. And we pride ourselves with really going above and beyond to help educate people, help them understand the whole program and the process so they feel comfortable. Yeah.
Well, that's an important part. I mean, I've got my specialties and things, but I can't admit, investments and so on, I just kind of stay basic with my RSPs and other things. I want to make sure if I'm going to do something else that somebody can explain it to me in lay terms so it makes sense so that I don't do something stupid because I'm prone to that sometimes.
Yeah. Well, we're just experts in the gold and silver markets, and the credibility comes with, we are an approved brokerage firm for Quest Trade, which is one of the 4 largest trading platforms in all of Canada, and a member and a rating of the Better Business Bureau, and working with IDS, Lloyd's of London, and the largest wholesaler on planet Earth. So. And have a long track record. So all the credibility is there. Of course, we understand that. And more than selling gold and silver, though, like Tessa said, we look at service first, and we really believe that we're helping people because we think it's really important to look at your financial positions, resetting your financial positions before any type of reset in this overvalued stock market. We don't know what it's going to do, and those are the best times to be in gold and silver.
Yeah, and people need advice. I mean, different people might have different needs and what they should do. I mean, that's where you could talk with somebody, perhaps this portion is more appropriate to go here for this long. We don't necessarily know. I mean, different packages will serve different people, better or worse, I imagine, right?
There's a lot of buzz about, Trump and checking out Fort Knox and is the gold there? And
I saw that column.
And it's really actually like brought a lot of mainstream people who haven't been thinking about gold into the conversation. So it's hit, it was even on Tucker Carlson, so it's hit this kind of mainstream point, but But the point behind all of that conversation is people are learning that like central banks around the world have physical gold and silver, and they have been stockpiling it for the last few years. So we always say to people, if they're doing that, why aren't we doing that? Why isn't the common and more than that, why is that not something that's brought to people through their wealth, managers, etc.? And again, we talked about how it doesn't really benefit their model, right? It's a paper or a digital balance sheet, right? So it doesn't. So we're kind of like, well, let's look at what the biggest players are doing, and even if we're modest in our portfolios, should we not be following and also have a percentage of our portfolios in physical metals as well? So,
excellent. We'll bring it down to the regular person. The time goes fast. Before I let you go, what else did you want to kind of hit upon with this, or we kind of covered the works?
Well, I wanted to add to those central banks is the last time, because gold and silver is also the most predictable market in the world because it's the oldest, so we go in cycles. And not only are we excited about the regular average return of 9%, but we believe we're in a full-blown, just starting bull market in gold and silver. The last bull market that central banks and countries bought record amounts of gold and silver was in the 1970s, and it was followed by an 800% increase in the gold prices and over 1,000% increase in the silver prices. And we believe that's coming again, and it's just getting started.
Yeah, well, nobody's mutual funds that can claim that kind of growth, reality. So, most important of all, where can people find you? How are we going to get a hold of you? New World Precious Metals.
Yeah, so our website is New World PM, standing for preciousmetals.com, so newworldpm.com. And it's probably the easiest way to get a hold of us is just go online and find us there.
Right on. Well, thanks for coming in to talk to us today. And these important things. I mean, we all are working and striving to hopefully, just save a nest egg and retire somewhat comfortably. And again, it's not always about making millions. You just want to be secure.
Well, let's protect what we work so hard for, and our metals are 100% insured, and not even any of your investments can say that, with CDIC, et cetera. So
yeah, well, you can't destroy the gold. It's not going to go in a fire or something like that. So that's just pretty Well, even tarnish.
Except for the silver, we have to get a cloth out.
Yeah, you get a little black. All right. Well, thank you again, guys. And, I look forward to talking again.
Thank you so much, Cory. Thanks for having me.
Okay, thank you.
Take care. Have a great day.
For your work.
Yeah.
All right, guys. So, it's just that those things are a little dry, I guess, for some, but it's important. It really is, especially so you start getting a little gray around the muzzle like me. I don't have a massive amount saved up for retirement. I'm fortunate. I've got a brilliant wife who's a bookkeeper who takes care of a lot of those things for me, but you want to maximize, and it's scary. Like, what is going to happen in the next while? What if a big war does break out? Currencies can really go to next to nothing and quickly if you're not careful with things. And if that's what your investments are based on, you're in some serious trouble. Way back a long time ago, be the late 80s. I went to the tour of the Soviet Union, went through a few things. It's just an extreme example. But you could buy a pack of cigarettes back there, these god-awful Russian cigarettes. You could smell them from 5 blocks away. But they were 50 kopecks, which was half of a ruble for a package of cigarettes back then, which I think came out to like 25 cents Canadian or something. It was a nice cheap cigarettes when I was over there. I don't know what the heck a ruble is worth now. Is it like hundreds and hundreds of rubles to $1 or something? The ruble's worth a penny, I think, or something. It has gone to the toilet. The Soviets destroyed their currency. Venezuela destroyed their currency. Some African countries just did some horrific things with them. And if you were invested, you could end up in serious trouble if that's where your savings were based. So just sharing advice. I mean, I'm not going to give direct financial advice. That's why I brought the experts in for it. But always don't keep all your eggs in one basket, I guess, is one of the more important things to kind of look at as cliche as that might sound. Because, you can put your investments at risk. So give them a look, guys. New World Precious Metals. Okay, the next guest I have coming on, and again, I think it's timely, and I read his book, and it's very good if you like reading history, and I certainly do, and a good perspective on things. He's with the MacDonald Laurier Institute. He wrote a great column in there the other week as well, or a great column that came out from that under that name. His name is, and this is where I tend to slaughter things. Perhaps you could start things off with a correction. Patrick Dutil, or Patrice, I should say, Dutil. And he wrote
That's fine, Cory. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Sir John A. Macdonald, The Apocalyptic Year, 1885. So thank you for coming on to speak with a. There's been many, many books written, of course, about Sir John A. Macdonald. He founded the country, but you've written this and focused on, of his long career and founding of the nation, probably what was really the most challenging and tumultuous year he endured. Can you kind of, what motivated you to write that particular year?
Well, you're right. We think of Sir John A. Macdonald. We used to think of Sir John A. Macdonald as the founder of Canada, one of the founders of Canada in 1867. But there's another Macdonald, the one that comes to power after in 1878, and who has to deal with a multitude of problems all through the 1880s. There's a serious recession, and what I thought needed to be done was a book that would focus on those particular trends through the 1980s. And as I did more reading and more research, the year 1885 came into view. Now we all know 1885, because of the Riel rebellion on the Saskatchewan River. But there's a whole bunch more things that happened to Sir John, to the government of Canada, to Sir John A. Macdonald, the Prime Minister, that really sheds a particular light on what it was like to be in government in the mid 1880s, and just dealing with a whole range of issues that are international, regional, and local. So that's what makes it so fascinating.
Absolutely. And some of what I read, just the same sort of challenges you see in the House of Commons between the opposition and the leadership. In some ways, the times have changed, but the attitudes haven't so much. But something else, and that's what you wrote in your column more recently too, though. You didn't try to canonize Sir John A. Macdonald, but at the same time, you wrote, we've got to stop trying to view these historical figures through the modern lens. Times have changed. You can't measure them against what's acceptable, or considered acceptable in the new millennia right now. They were progressive for their times. And with us kind of demonizing our past historical figures has been a terrible trend lately.
Oh, for sure. And I think that it's really been unfair. What makes Sir John...
Okay, it looks like we might have lost Patrice for a moment.
So I think compelling, even century, is that he was, regional difficulties, and he's also dealing with a plague. Smallpox hits Canada in 1885. There's a whole range of issues. You've got the big empires fighting it out in 1885. You've got demands on Canada from Great Britain to get involved in Africa. It's a whole range of things. For me, a book like this shows what it was like. Again, I come back to the difficulty of actually governing in 1885, and showing how it wasn't an easy thing. That accusations such that John A. Macdonald, for example, was genocidal, that he did things that were unfair, that is simply misunderstanding the realities that he was dealing with. And as it turns out, he reveals himself as a politician with far-reaching ideas. I'll give you an example. In the middle of all this, he launches an initiative to expand the right to vote. And who does he want to give the vote to? Women, and not just women, but Indigenous people. Again, in 1885, Sir John A. Macdonald is battling with Riel, fighting for a certain idea of Canada. But what kind of idea is he have? In my view, it's a very progressive idea. He had ideas for the future of the country that were ambitious, that were popular. I try to bring out in the book the fact that he's reelected in 1887. He loses a few seats, but he still wins the popular vote. He still wins government. He still wins the majority of seats. And in Quebec in particular, he continues to increase his take of votes. So when we're thinking of Sir John A. Macdonald today, and he's been demonized from one end of the country to the other. He's been demonized in our schools. The statues have been destroyed. Names of streets have been changed. We're not understanding what Sir John A. Macdonald was about. And I think that if there's a message in all this, is that we need to be a little bit more modest in our 21st century and appreciate what he was doing, what he and his government was doing. Again, he's never alone. What he was doing with his government. And I think that if you actually look at the record, you're going to come to a different understanding of Sir John A. and maybe appreciate him more. And when when he comes up in conversation, hopefully you'll have better arguments to defend the record. I think that his record is eminently defendable. I find it hard to believe that people could have done much better than the way he did.
Yes, well, and your book adds a lot of great context to just what he was dealing with First Nations people in a great period of transition, particularly in the West, as we're getting expansionism going to the West from European settlers, and you've got a population that's trying to adapt to a massive change over the course of just a couple generations. Misguided policies, perhaps, but well-intentioned, like, for example, trying to get First Nations people into agriculture, saying, well, you have that land, we can turn you into farmers, you can prosper, you could do well. And they tried hard, but it never took.
Well, it's, again, on the face of it, it's completely been hunter-gatherers who lived by the rhythm of the buffalo, the bison, for 25, 30 generations. And within one generation, the buffalo disappears. This is ruinous. And you have to feel for the indigenous communities that were faced with the extinction. Now, the government could have done nothing. They could have done nothing. But John A. comes in and he says, "No, we're going to do something. We're going to provide rations. The Americans didn't provide rations. We're going to provide rations. We're going to provide model farms. We're going to send agents to help the indigenous people make the transition to farming." Now, again, we have trouble changing our habits in the 21st century. Can you imagine being in the in the 1880s, having to face this? It's incredible. It's incredibly difficult. Now, the indigenous people, to their credit, say, okay, we're going to do it. We're going to do it. And there are people, who the Blackfoot, for example, who really do make that leap. And it's not easy, but they do still learn to farm. And there are lots of good farms, like literally turning on a dime, creating great farms in Alberta and Saskatchewan that are model farms. And and the fact is that MacDonald manages to succeed. He succeeds in getting the allegiance of the indigenous people. He was not at war with the indigenous people. They were with him. They were all with him. They all said during the Riel Rebellion, "We're not with Riel." It was a pledge of loyalty to the government and to the crown. Let's not forget that. Let's not forget that Sitting Bull, the American indigenous leader, came to Canada when Sir John A. Macdonald is in power and seeks refuge in Canada and will live in Canada for 4 years. I mean, come on, let's understand Sir John A. Macdonald for what he did. It wasn't perfect, as you said. It wasn't perfect. People did suffer immensely. There was no railway. You could not ship enough food. You could not even calculate how much food you would need. And not surprisingly, come April or May, there's going to be food's going to be missing out. Was it deliberate? I don't think it was deliberate. The Canadian government is under serious financial pressures. It couldn't feed everybody, and it wasn't meant to feed everybody. It was meant to subsidize, to add to the production the indigenous people would do on their own. It wasn't there, the Canadian rations were not there to feed people to do nothing. It was really meant as an incentive. You can look at it bitterly, or you can look at it the way it was meant. And the same thing goes with the residential schools. Now, I'm not discounting the pain of residential schools in the 20th century, but the intention of the residential schools was to give the indigenous people an opportunity to read and write and learn the math, to integrate into mainstream society. This is what Macdonald wanted. Did he want to see them suppressed? Did he want to see them eliminated? Absolutely not. That was the farthest thing from his mind. So what you see in Sir John A. Macdonald is a government that's actually trying to do things, and he's spending a lot of money. Indian Affairs in the mid-1880s is the third largest expense in the government of Canada. So, when we hear all this stuff about Sir John A., I'm simply saying, look at the record, compare his record to anybody else. And you're going to see that, Sir John A. managed to be a progressive. He was a progressive conservative leader.
And he managed to, he took a lot of flack for the size of the Indigenous Affairs or, Indian Affairs budget from back in the day. He's good on that hill. The easiest course, at least, again, I mean, nobody's trying to say he was a perfect man or polish the warts, but if he was truly a genocidal madman who hated First Nations people, the easiest thing he could have done is nothing. And unfortunately, sickness and starvation would have taken the whole issue out. And
if you want to talk about sickness and death, I mean, again, in 1885, I talk about this in the book, there is serious harm. In that 5,000 people in Quebec die of smallpox. That's a lot of people that die within the space of 3 or 4 months. 5,000 people. Now, why is that? Well, it's because the Quebecois did not want to have vaccination against smallpox. They actually fought it. The government of Canada provided vaccination to anybody who wanted it, including the Indigenous, and the Indigenous took it. They had the vaccination against the smallpox, and the Indigenous communities around Montreal were completely unaffected by smallpox. I mean, how many Indigenous lives did Sir John A. actually save? You have to ask yourself, going from 1867 with the purchase of Rupert's Land. I mean, again, can you imagine if Canada had not purchased Rupert's Land? Today it's seen as colonialism. Well, if Canada had not purchased Rupert's Land, it would have been taken over by the Americans. What would have been the fate of the Indigenous people if the Americans had been allowed in? I don't know. I mean, I'm saying we have to put Macdonald in a different light, in a light that is informed by fact. And if you see that, and if you see my argument, you have to say that this desacralization of Macdonald, the fact that these statues have been taken down. There used to be 11 statues to Sir John A. Macdonald. There are now 2 left out of the 11. That's not right. And I think it's when we're now being asked to really value our nationality, I think that we have to wonder, what gave us this nationality? Well, I'm sorry, but it's going to be Sir John A. Macdonald. Sir John A. Macdonald defended the Canadian nationality. He had a certain idea about it, that's for sure. But it was a Canada that was fair, a Canada that was robust, a Canada that, that had ambition. And that's the Macdonald that I see.
Yeah, well, and to kind of close things out, some of the irony and it shows the importance of knowing where we came from in our history, so we don't repeat it. In that Macdonald grasped with an epidemic and had vaccine challenges with some people on the uptake, and centuries later, here we go going through it all again. So. Before I let you go, where can people find your work and where can they find your book in particular?
Thank you so much for asking. I do have a website, patricedutil.com, PATRICEDUTIL.com. My books are available wherever you find books. And I hope that people will want to pick it up and learn a little bit about Sir John A. and how we could see him differently.
Great, yes, and it's an interesting read. It really is. I'm not just saying that because he's the guest on here. If it was dry, I wouldn't have reached out to bring him on. So
you're very kind. You're very kind.
I appreciate it, and I appreciate you coming on to talk to us, and look forward to your future works. So thank you again.
Thank you very much, Cory.
All right. So yes, that is again Patrice Dutil. He's okay. Help me with that. See, I'm learning as I go with these things. And again, the book Sir John A. Macdonald, The Apocalyptic Year in 1885. And he's done other works as well. And you'll see pieces from the Macdonald Laurier Institute. And, I just found it striking with the irony of vaccination, epidemics, pandemics. So, some of the mistakes we haven't learned from, I guess. Perhaps the government should have studied a little more on why were the Quebecois so reticent to get vaccinated back then, versus others. There's some people who are opposed to all vaccines under all circumstances, no matter what you do. Okay, fine. They're there. And unfortunately, we're seeing now outbreaks of measles and rubella and a lot of things we thought were out of our skin because of past vaccination. The rushed thing with COVID, you see, again, COVID didn't provide anywhere near, not even vaguely close to the threat of smallpox. Not even, that's a whole separate show and discussion. And then to have the government rush a vaccine the way it did and coerce so many people into getting it. There's the interesting thing, individual rights certainly weren't often really all that respected or recognized quite 100 and some years ago. But they obviously didn't try to force the vaccine on Quebecois people back then, even though that seemed to appear to be addressing a much more dangerous disease than what COVID is. Up here with COVID, the government said, oh, no, we won't force you, but we will take away your ability to have a job or travel or, participate in sports or go into public places or go into a restaurant for a meal. They set vaccination back in this country and other countries over COVID decades and decades. So John A. Macdonald was setting it forward back then. Saving people from things like, and again, since then, we don't have to worry about rabies, tetanus, a whole raft of things that vaccines, protect us from. I know some people don't believe any of them. That's fine. That's your right. The government should never force the vaccine. I think people should make the rational decision to take the vaccine and most often experience the benefit of it. But these issues actually are circular, and I would suspect the smallpox vaccine, though, of back then was probably a pretty rough one. There were probably more adverse effects. I mean, again, the smallpox itself was horrific, so you're willing to take that chance. Because, again, it wasn't anything like COVID. It wasn't the case of a flu that only harms people who were pretty much got one foot out the door. Smallpox was killing people all over the place, so you're willing to take that chance of an adverse effect from a primitive vaccine. But history is so important. And having a realistic lens. So getting back to what, Patrice was talking about, that we're recrafting who Sir John A. Macdonald was. And his book is good in going into that. He wasn't perfect, not by a long shot. And yeah, he was a drinker. He made mistakes. But people are painting him as a genocidal madman, and it's ridiculous. And the reason I wanted to bring him in, too, is that we've got this sudden resurgence of Canadian pride now that there's a trade war going on with the United States. The hypocrisy of a whole lot of the bloody lefties, though, who are eager to help support the tearing down of Sir John A. Macdonald's statues, who called him genocidal, who called contemporary Canadians genocidal, a load of horse shit. But that's what they did. And now suddenly they're patriotic Canadians. Well, if you're going to be taking on that role today, read some friggin' history, you jackasses. Have a look at what really happened back then instead of this absurd self-loathing that you guys embraced. With this, we're settlers in a genocidal state. Oh, kiss my ass. I was born here. I haven't genocided anybody. I'm not living on stolen land. I've actually got a deed for mine. That narrative has got to go. It's divisive. It's wrong-headed. It harms us. Plus, we're erasing our own bloody history, which is stupid. It really is. Have a critical eye on your historic figures. But don't erase them, you morons. They're what built us to where we are. As was pointed out, John A. Macdonald's decades ahead. When did women get the right to vote in Canada? I believe it was 1917. He was decades and decades ahead. It was probably a hard stance to take at that time. An important one. But you're going to crap on him? So there's only 2 statues of him remaining. And speaking of nutless, because let's talk about Doug Ford. Because he's Captain Canada lately, until he fell on his face with his little... It reminded me of, like a cartoon of a guy in a knight in shining armor running with his joust and then trips over his own feet and lands in a mud puddle I'm going to take on Trump. And then he retreated as soon as he saw the light of Trump's eyes. But also in front of the Ontario legislature, people see this. They may not have gone recently. There's a big concrete box sitting out there. Not concrete, plywood. It's all covered up. What's that? It's a statue of John A. Macdonald. Been there for a long, long time. But it kept getting vandalized by left extremists. So rather than show the courage of protecting it, they boarded it up. You wimps. You wimps. Just protect it. Stand up for it. It's our history. Don't let these extremist clowns pull it down and pull it away. In Calgary, here, we have the Olympic Plaza. And along it, there was a fantastic... the famous five large bronze statues that were in there of the women who brought about, the right to vote, the right to be people in Canada, all of that. Emily Murphy, Nellie McClung, I get the rest of the names. Important women, though. But the thing was, they started getting demonized because it turns out that Nellie McClung, or was it Murphy, or maybe both, were pretty darn racist. And they supported eugenics policies. Yeah, that's the way it was 100 and some years ago. But they also brought about the right to vote. Quit erasing somebody because they held views back then that were unacceptable today. It's stupid. So they took those statues out of Olympic Plaza and put them in storage. The city of Calgary did this. They're saying, no, it's not canceling. Okay. We don't know where we're gonna put them yet. I promise you, watch right now. Those pussies, and they are, civil governments are the worst, won't bring those out of storage. They don't want to bring them out of storage. They don't want to put them somewhere else. Because they've already said they're not going back into the new Olympic Plaza that they're renovating. So where are they going to put them? They might stick them in the corner of some distant park or something. They were fantastic statues. Thousands and thousands of people took pictures next to those statues. Thousands and hundreds of thousands of young women, girls were inspired by the acts of those women. But our fools of today, trying to measure our historical figures in the lens of modern woke ideology, are tearing them down. So books on our history are really important. And yeah, they don't have to be puff pieces. You know, you don't have to make these figures look like gods or geniuses all the time or that they did everything right. But they weren't all wrong either. And if we erase them all together, we don't get to learn from their successes or their failures. The, agricultural aspect, they tried, and yeah, they failed. First Nations people still today are a lot of prime farmland. They just didn't embrace farming. It's not their thing. The next move was the residential schools. Here's an irony. A lot of people haven't read treaties. Read them. They're all online. They're actually relatively simple documents. One of the commonalities in almost all the treaties, people read all these other rights into them. There's actually not a heck of a lot in there. Most of it's talking about the extent of the land, which there was some bad dealing on. But when it came to obligations from the government, not many really. Not a whole lot of the things that we give them today. That's under the Indian Act. That's a separate thing altogether. But within the treaties, one of the things that was always there was education. And that's because the chiefs demanded it. They said, we need our young people educated. They did understand that if in this modern world that's coming, the younger kids coming up are going to prosper, if they're going to do well, they need to know how to read, how to write, how to do basic math. These things that were mysterious to them, looking at the other traders who were screwing them on deals while they were around there, or tradesmen who were ripping them off on the price of goods because these weren't educated people. They wanted that education, and then that's what brought about the residential schools. It was actually a treaty obligation. No, they weren't nice places. Yes, there was abuse. But again, we're recrafting what the actual history of those schools were. Those schools were welcomed by a whole lot of First Nations people. And why were they residential? Well, it's because back in those times, you couldn't build one all over the place when you had a scattered, still semi-nomadic population. So you built centralized areas, yes, boarding schools. I went to a boarding school, certainly not as tough as what the residential schools were. No, I couldn't imagine. But still, they were environments where they could bring them together with the intent of educating. And then it was religious organizations, yes, the Catholics and others that took that on, that role. And it was a high discipline, rough environment. And some of them did some awful things. There's no doubt about it. But let's quit pretending. Every one of them was 150,000 people over the course of 100 years went to those schools. They're acting as if, and you listen to it when it comes to the settlements, as if every First Nations person in Canada up to yesterday went to one. No, 150,000. Not that many. And not all of them suffered. Quit making that out to be. A lot of them did. But not all of them did. But we keep expanding this victim rhetoric, and where is it going, right? I mean, part of it now, I said, listen on the radio when I torture myself, listen to CBC Radio, our state broadcaster, when they were talking about, I was a school survivor, a day school survivor. What? I looked into it. Yes, they call themselves survivors if they went to a day school. In other words, if they went to school. Everybody went to school. And yes, most of us survived. We don't walk around calling ourselves survivors of it. They went to school. So even when it was totally voluntary, with schools on the reserves where kids went to school during the day and went home at night. And now they're victims. Now they're going to be called survivors. Why? Well, because we cut some really big settlement checks. The Blackfoot Reserve, now called Siksika, that was referenced, when I was talking to my guest. Justin Trudeau just cut them a check on a settlement for $20,000 per individual there. We keep settling and settling and settling. How much? The Kamloops residential school area, where 0 bodies have been discovered, but they were given $12 million to look for them, and they didn't bother looking. Unfortunately, victimhood is lucrative. We should recognize real wrongs. We should avoid repeating real wrongs, but we keep building this intergenerational BS victimhood. It's not serving anybody. So read your history. Appreciate what they did right. Learn from what they did wrong. Because if you cancel them, nobody wins. All right, let's see a few more items getting federally before I get going here, guys. Let's see. Trudeau's spent $15 million, the Liberals, to facilitate DEI warfare in the Middle East. How do you like that? Speaking of screwing you for your dollars, right? $15 million, DEI. So they got to make sure that Middle Eastern armies have the appropriate amount of trans people in them. Or women, that's part of it. Guess what, guys? The Middle Eastern countries don't even let the woman drive. They're not going to have them in their armies. Where did you put that money? What a stupid waste. And oh, by the way, trans people, gay people, they kill them there. So I don't know where your DEI warfare dollars went, but that goes on top of, yes, the Trudeau in his 10 years in there, $11 billion on overseas gender programs. $11 billion. Yeah, with a B. On gender programs. How much can you talk about gender? Apparently $11 billion worth of it. You can. All right, let's see what else we got going on. We got a lame duck foreign minister, Melanie Jolie, G.I. Jolie, wearing her nice green stuff. She's at some G7 summit. That'll be something interesting to watch. We're getting into the election. We have a G7 summit we're hosting in Canada in June. Presumably we'll have a prime minister elected by then. And there's a lot of discussion whether or not Trump will be at it. I don't know. So yeah, and as Dave mentioned, Stephen Guilbeault has been removed as environment minister in Carney's cabinet, whatever it may be. Again, we're just polishing a turd. There's only so much you could do. That party needs rejuvenation, even if the Liberals win re-election. Oh, let's hope they don't. The new prime minister needs a new pool for cabinet. You got to get rid of those old ones, Jolie, Guilbeault. I mean, Trudeau did DEI cabinet appointments, which means he always wanted to maintain a gender balance and a racial balance if he could, but he wasn't worried about competency, and it shows with a lot of them who were in there. All right, but that's enough for today. Thank you for tuning in. Look, next week, we're going to be on live. Get on there. Watch. Set your clock for it. I'll be on Wednesday, of course, as usual, on my shorter show. This is going to be on every Friday, the live, so that way we can have the comments. We can have some discussions. I got more time on my hands. As you can hear on here, I'm a little less restrained. This doesn't go on to the TV channels like my other show does, so I can be a little more frank in my conversations, and we can talk a little longer and expand on some issues. I'll have a whole new set of guests, issues. We'll see what's going on. Maybe there'll be an election by then. Maybe there won't. There'll certainly be issues and a lot of things going on. So thank you very much for tuning in today, guys. Share those links. Get it out there. And I will see you all on Wednesday on my regular show.
What does success mean to you? Peace of mind? Financial freedom? Generational wealth? What do you see in your future? Investing in gold and silver can help you get there. Through our trading partners, New World Precious Metals offers safe, affordable, secure international accounts to help you meet your unique financial goals. Connect with one of our experienced team members. Invest in gold and silver today.